I recently moved out, leaving behind the place I once called home. My mother-in-law cheerfully remarked over the phone, "It must be tough not having a home." I barely whispered a response. As she wished me well in my new residence, I simply replied, "Thank you, and please stay away from my home, especially since you're getting a divorce." After that, she ended the call. I found myself at the airport, not with anger, but with a sense of relief and victory, feeling lighter as I made my way back to my own space. My name is Alice. My husband Arthur and I had to endure a long-distance relationship shortly after our wedding because of his job overseas. Having been together for 6 years before marriage, our trust was deep-rooted, which comforted me during his absence. I wasn't worried about fidelity. I just wanted him to stay safe. Our lives were generally peaceful, though loneliness crept in at times. However, the situation took a stressful turn when my mother-in-law decided to move into our house during Arthur's stint abroad. Her decision was rooted in her past trauma. She had been left by my father-in-law, who vanished after cheating on her. Fearing history might repeat itself with Arthur, she imposed herself in our home to monitor me, proclaiming, "I'll keep an eye on you, Alice, to make sure you don't stray." Her presence became an oppressive shadow in my daily life, pushing me to desperation. I reached out to Arthur for support, and although he repeatedly asked his mother to leave, she resisted. "Arthur trusts you too much, Alice. You'll end up cheating," she would accuse baselessly, making my days unbearable. No matter what I did, her suspicions and scrutiny never waned. She suspected me of infidelity, refusing even to cook dinner. She would use food from the fridge for her meals, never leaving anything for me, and she never bought groceries herself, always using what I purchased. This left me with nothing when I returned home. I voiced my complaints, but my mother-in-law seemed indifferent. "I bet you're out having dinner with your boyfriend since you're cheating," she would accuse, which deeply upset me. Even when I returned late from work and began to cook, she would create a scene. "You must be cheating if you come home at this hour, leaving your mother-in-law alone," she'd say. During my hectic work periods, when I often returned home late, she persistently accused me of being unfaithful. It stressed me to the point of feeling ill. "Please, I'm begging you, just leave. I'm not cheating. I love Arthur," I pleaded with her. Arthur, overwhelmed with work and unable to return to the U.S., did his best to persuade his mother to leave, but she only grew more obstinate. "So, you want me to leave that badly? You must be cheating," she concluded. At that point, all I could do was sigh. On my day off, I decided to meet a friend to escape the tension. Predictably, my mother-in-law accused me of cheating again and attempted to follow me in a rather clumsy surveillance effort. She hid behind lampposts and the brick wall of her house, trying to stay hidden. I simply ignored her antics and continued with my plans. At the cafe, as I met with my friend Sandra, who I've known since our college days, I noticed sudden flashes of light. My mother-in-law was taking pictures of us. Sandra, noticing the bizarre situation, looked perplexed and asked, "What's that?" Ready to confront the situation head-on, Sandra stood up, prepared to address her directly, asking, "Should I say something to her?" I quickly urged Sandra to remain seated. "No, please stay," I said. Sandra, sporting a pixie cut and dressed in trendy streetwear, had an androgynous charm. I half joked that my mother-in-law might have mistaken her for a man, which sent Sandra into peals of laughter. Finding humor in the absurdity, Sandra leaned in and pretended to hold my hand, further teasing my mother-in-law. Each time she snapped a photo, her excitement was palpable, and her nostrils flared as if she'd discovered something scandalous. It was so ludicrous that I joined Sandra in laughter. The whole ordeal turned into a comedic spectacle. After enduring my mother-in-law's antics, I felt a wave of relief and went shopping with Sandra. We enjoyed our time until we parted ways. Predictably, my mother-in-law tailed me on the way home, ducking behind lampposts and walls, much like before. Sometimes I amused myself by playing a brief game of red light, green light with her, watching her scurry to hide each time. It was amusing to engage in her bizarre game, thinking how foolish it was for her to believe I hadn't noticed her following me. When I arrived home and began to remove my shoes, she approached me, flushed with excitement. Holding up a disposable camera, she exclaimed, "Alice, I finally caught proof of your cheating. I'm going to send these to Arthur, so get ready." "Oh, really? Good luck with that," I responded nonchalantly, which she didn't appreciate. She spent the rest of the time buzzing around me like an annoyed child. "Are you okay with this? It's proof of cheating. Your face and his are clear in the photos," she insisted, believing she had irrefutable evidence. I responded calmly each time, "That's fine." While it was unfortunate that Sandra's appearance sometimes led to her being mistaken for a man, Arthur was well acquainted with her from our time before marriage. Therefore, even if my mother-in-law sent a photo of me with Sandra to Arthur, he would easily recognize her just as a friend. Despite my mother-in-law's ludicrous antics, I had to embark on a business trip overseas. It was disappointing not to see Arthur since he was in another country, but the trip was necessary. I informed my mother-in-law about my upcoming travel without seeking her input. To her, however, my business trip seemed like a romantic excursion. As I prepared to leave, she smirked and remarked, "It'll be a big problem if you come back pregnant from your romantic getaway. Arthur hasn't seen you in a while, so it won't be easy to pretend the baby is his." Her unsavory thoughts made arguing futile. I casually brushed off her comment, "Yeah, it's just a business trip, not a romantic getaway," and departed. The trip proved hectic and the days flew by. When I finally returned to the U.S., I was utterly exhausted, and so was my boss who had traveled with me. Before heading home, I planned to pick up some duty-free sweets and took a moment to rest on a bench. Just then, my phone rang. It was Sandra, and she had surprising news. "Hey, Alice, welcome back. There's something I need to tell you. Your mother-in-law showed up at the company where I work." Hearing that was startling. Sandra's family's company wasn't the kind of place just anyone visits. Learning that my mother-in-law had visited Sandra's workplace frustrated me. Sandra shared how she dealt with the situation and wondered if she had gone too far. I assured her with a laugh, "No, I think it was just right," and after wrapping up our call, I was ready to head out when my phone rang again. This time it was my mother-in-law. "Alice, you should be back from your trip now. Did you enjoy your affair trip?" she asked mockingly. I corrected her. "It wasn't an affair trip, and I didn't particularly enjoy it because it was for work." "Well, I've already sent Arthur the evidence photos," she replied smugly. I responded with a disinterested, which seemed to satisfy her despite my lack of reaction. She continued, oblivious to my disinterest. "Actually, I moved so your house is no longer there. I sold the old house, so you must be struggling without a place to go back to, but hang in there," she said cheerfully. I replied with a flat, as she laughed. "Enjoy your life in your new house, thank you, and please never come back to our house. After all, you're going to be divorced soon." After she hung up, I lingered in the airport momentarily, but then began to feel a sense of relief. There wasn't anger in my heart, but rather a sense of triumph. I allowed myself a small fist pump and started my journey home with a lighter step. Of course, I was returning to the house my mother-in-law claimed to have sold. Maybe she had even taken out some of the furniture, but whatever was missing, I took it as a parting gift. Despite her claims and antics, the situation seemed less burdensome now, and I was ready to move on with a lighter heart. I immediately called a locksmith to change the front door lock, making sure my mother-in-law couldn't re-enter the house. Once that was taken care of, I sprawled out in the living room, relishing the newfound freedom that came with having the space all to myself. In a burst of joy, I pumped my fist in the air and shouted, "I did it!" The following day, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. Her voice was flustered and shaky as she spoke. "Alice, something's gone wrong." I couldn't help but ask with a touch of sarcasm, "What's wrong?" "I thought I sold the house, but it turns out I didn't. I borrowed money without realizing it, and now debt collectors are coming. "It's scary," she stammered. "That sounds terrifying," I replied, a hint of real concern creeping into my voice. It turned out that the company she had mistakenly visited, thinking it was Sandra's parents' place, was a shady business masquerading as a real estate firm but involved in loan sharking. Sandra had told me they repeatedly warned that the house couldn't be sold. The house was in Arthur's name, so she couldn't have sold it independently. After facing rejection from several real estate agencies, in her desperation, she ended up at the company owned by Sandra's parents. There, they had her sign a promissory note without her fully understanding the consequences. The document bound her to a massive debt with a daunting repayment schedule of $1,500 per day. She managed to scrape together enough to fend off the debt collectors for the day, but she was out of options for continuing the payments. In tears, she came to me, pleading, "Please, Alice, you have to help me. The debt collectors have been relentless." Since dawn, my mother-in-law had been facing relentless visits from debt collectors at her door. "It's terrifying. I can't sleep well and I don't have much money left. I used the borrowed money to buy a new house, so I have no savings," she lamented. Her next request took me by surprise. "Could you please transfer $21,000 to my account every week until I've paid off the debt?" But then she questioned the feasibility of her solution. "Honestly, do you think there will ever be a day when we can pay off this company's debt? Even if we combine my income with Arthur's, it's impossible to come up with that much money every week." I replied sympathetically but firmly, "I'm sorry, but your only option is to work hard and earn it yourself. Isn't there a job out there where you can make $1,500 every day?" Half jokingly, I suggested, "Why not try talking to the company you borrowed money from? Maybe they can help you find a good job." Confused but hopeful, my mother-in-law responded, "Really? Then I'll go and see," and hurriedly hung up. I sighed to myself, realizing there was no stopping her now. Later, Sandra informed me that my mother-in-law had indeed shown up at the company pleading, "I have no choice but to work because I have no money. Is there a simple and easy job where I can earn more than $1,500 a day?" Sandra and her team managed to find a job for her, but it was far from what she had hoped for. The company was a harsh place where many employees lived in run-down shacks serving as dormitories. Here, workers toiled day and night, engaged in physically demanding labor. Even elderly workers were pushed to their limits. My mother-in-law found herself working to the brink of exhaustion. The workplace's dormitories were enclosed with barbed wire, giving the place the grim appearance of a prison. Employees were blindfolded and transported to and from work in vans, which kept them unaware of their location. "She'll be free once she can pay off the debt if that day ever comes," Sandra remarked with a wry smile. Despite being a dear friend, I couldn't help feeling a bit frightened for my mother-in-law under such conditions. Several weeks later, after my mother-in-law had vanished into her new grim routine, Arthur's overseas assignment concluded, and he returned home. I filled him in on everything that had transpired. Arthur simply responded, "There's nothing we can do about my mom. All we can do is wish her well from a distance." It was evident that Arthur had never really been close with his mother. While he had tolerated her out of familial duty, her constant suspicions and meddling, especially towards me, his wife, had exhausted his patience. When I queried Arthur about the supposed evidence photos of my infidelity, he seemed almost forgetful, casually retrieving a photo from his bag. "That's Sandra, right? I have no idea why my mom would think this is proof of infidelity. I had a big argument with her on the phone. I told her I'd cut ties since she kept suspecting you, Alice, but she wouldn't listen." He shrugged, frustrated yet somewhat amused by the absurdity. I thought this was a good picture, so I brought it home. Indeed, my mother-in-law might have had an unintended talent for photography. The photo she took of Sandra and me, with beautiful scenery in the background, had a certain artistic flair, almost like a page from a stylish photo album. It was amusing how Sandra was playfully making a peace sign behind her back in the photo, just so like her. We owe Sandra a lot for her help during this ordeal. We should visit her properly sometime soon. Just be careful not to sign any documents she might try to give you, I joked with Arthur. Laughing, he replied, I'll never sign anything from Sandra. It felt good to share a light moment after everything that had happened. Finally, Arthur and I were able to settle into our lives as a newly freed couple. We had no further news of my mother-in-law after she disappeared into her new job. She was probably still working hard somewhere in the States. We could have inquired through Sandra about her whereabouts, but neither of us was inclined to track her down. Arthur and I continued to live happily, our lives evolving beautifully as we welcomed our first child. These days were truly blissful, filled with the joy and peace that came from just being together.